Now we need to. I'm going to introduce our speaker now. Brad Roush is a software engineer in the Southern California area with over 10 years of experience in mobile and web development. He has a passion for building great teams and learning and applying new technologies. So welcome, Brad, and we're excited for your talk.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take over.
Okay. All right. Can you guys see the title slide?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. An argument for mobile native app development. Actually, looking at the title now, I'm thinking maybe a better title would have been native development versus cross-platform development. But hopefully, it's kind of implied here that I'm comparing native development versus cross-platform development. So yeah, just who I am. My name is Brad Roush. I'm a senior manager at CCC Intelligent Solutions. So CCC is a company that works in the automobile collision insurance industry. So basically the main mission of CCC is to get people who get into car accidents, get them back on the road, back in, into their car faster. So providing software solutions to insurance companies and auto repair facilities. So I've been with them for 5 years. I manage a team of about 8 people, both QA analysts and engineers. We primarily do iOS, Android, C# development. Before there, I worked at a company that did software for children. You might know it on a Netflix TV show as Storybots. And before that, I worked at a mobile development agency, and that's where I got most of my experience with cross-platform development. So it was newer back then, and pretty much every project we were trying something new, just trying to get a good feel for what would work best for our clients. So kind of getting into what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to talk about why we're talking about this. Why are we discussing this this topic? Why is it important? I'm going to be going over about what cross-platform development is. A lot of you may already know what it is. Might be review. Some of you may have heard of it and kind of know a little bit about it. So I figured it'd be good just to kind of define it. I'm going to be going into why people choose cross-platform development. And some arguments there. And then I'm going to be transitioning into arguments for native development, and then some conclusion items and a Q&A. And like it was said earlier, feel free to post questions in the chat as we're going over things. Feel free to interrupt me. Anything that you guys have a question on is absolutely fine. Okay, so why are we talking about this? Why is this an important topic? One reason I thought of is that many people have strong opinions here. So I think that people who use cross-platform development on a daily basis, probably feel really strongly that their solution is the right one. I think that people who do native development might think that their platform is the right one. You even see this between iOS and Android engineers sometimes. People who think that iOS is better or Android's better, or we should do this or we should do that. So I think it really depends on who you talk to. People have strong opinions and think that, a certain solution or approach might be the best one. And then this is also really important because this is an early decision that needs to be made in any given project. So even usually before the first line of code is written, you take a look at the requirements, what the client wants, what the stakeholders want, and you need to decide, am I going to be building this natively for one operating system, for multiple operating systems? Should I choose a cross-platform to do this? If if the requirement is to do that, to publish on multiple platforms, is this a game? Should I use some sort of game engine? It's a very important decision that needs to be made very early in any given project lifecycle. And then once the decision's made, it's not very easy to reverse direction. So we had a situation when I was at the mobile development agency where we got a contract for a client to build an application. We chose a certain cross-platform solution to do that, and we were building and sending videos and builds along the way. And then once we got to a major milestone, like where we're about to release our beta, we sat in with the stakeholders, with the clients, and they asked some questions, and we couldn't make a change that they wanted because that platform didn't support it. And we had to make a difficult choice that position. We were well into the project. It wasn't very easy to reverse direction at that point. We either had to go forward without this want from the customer, or we had to start over. So it's not very easy to go backwards once a decision is made. So kind of getting to what cross-platform development is. Like I said earlier, and this might be review for a lot of you. It might, be new. So I'll just kind of make sure everyone's on the same page of what cross-platform development is. So I kind of define it as creating a piece of software that's compatible with multiple operating systems. And kind of take a look at a diagram. You have different operating systems. In this example, iOS and Android. There used to be a lot more mobile operating systems that were popular. For example, Windows OS on mobile devices was more popular several years ago. I think Facebook had an operating system at one point. We still have several others as well. But in this example, we'll be just taking a look at iOS and Android because those are the most popular mobile operating systems today. And on top of those operating systems, you have the SDKs that are available that Apple or Google would provide to interface with the operating systems and build applications on top of. And then with cross-platform solutions, they usually have a set of libraries that sit on top of the SDK, utilize the SDK, and also just interact directly with the operating system. And usually there's some sort of set of libraries or shared libraries could be that exist per operating system. And then you have the actual app code, the code that the engineer would write to create the application. And this could be a single code base. It could be a code base with multiple extensions, which we'll kind of get into later. But then the idea is during compile time, this app code is then compiled into a certain format or in a certain way that is able to run on top of these cross-platform libraries and be able to ship a executable application to a customer. All right, moving on there. Hopefully we're all on the same page. So today there's lots, or I guess today and through the last 10 plus years, there's been lots of options for cross-platform development, a lot of different platforms. So one of the most popular today is probably React Native. So this is a cross-platform solution that uses JavaScript and React framework. It's created by or supported by Facebook. And if you were to take a look at a lot of job postings today, a lot of them will be around React Native. So that's a very popular one today. Flutter is actually probably one of the more newer cross-platform development options, but it's been definitely gaining in popularity. I see more and more of these on the job postings, people who want Flutter developers or people with experience with Flutter. So Flutter is a platform that's developed by Google, and it uses the Dart programming language. It's type safe. It uses Android Studio. It has material design kind of baked into their UI capabilities. So Flutter's actually a really cool platform to use, and luckily I've been able to stay up to date with it. So Xamarin is another really popular cross-platform option. It's now a Microsoft part of the Microsoft suite of tools. And it also allows you to use C# to create iOS and Android applications. Unity. So this is kind of getting into games and game development. Unity also, you have a couple different programming options there, but I've used it with C# and runs on top of the Unity game engine, and you can develop really cool games really fast and develop not only on mobile platforms but also consoles as well, like Xbox and PlayStation, things like that. PhoneGap is probably one of the older ones. This is a cross-platform solution that I used to use back at the mobile development agency. It uses JavaScript and HTML pages, and one of the main drawbacks that we had with PhoneGap was it didn't feel as snappy as the native, a native application. It was great because we were able to develop applications really quickly, but it just didn't give a really good feel for our users. And that's kind of where Ionic comes in. So Ionic is also using JavaScript, but the way that it's architected, it feels native, being that it's super fast. I think a lot of things are kind of preloaded, or and it kind of solves that PhoneGap issue with performance and snappiness type of feel. There's also Accelerator Titanium. This is another framework that another platform that I used to use at the mobile development agency. And this is the one that we actually decided to use for a customer. And when it came time to actually demonstrate the beta that we're about to release, it was something as small as being able to swipe a cell in a table view, to swipe to delete it, or swipe to do some actions. Something that's very common today, and it may support now, but we couldn't do it with that platform, and there was no easy way to do it at all based on the capabilities of that platform. So we actually had to reverse direction later on, and it was a very poor experience for that client. And there's a lot of others. There's a Corona SDK, Adobe has a Cordova, I think now, and but there's lots of other cross-platform solutions. So I'm just kind of probably hitting the tip of the iceberg here. But the point is that there's lots to choose from, and it could be daunting at times for either the engineer making this decision, a startup owner making this decision. There's lots to consider, and lots of different options to choose from. So let's kind of get into some arguments for why someone would choose a cross-platform solution to create their application. And the main one is code reusability. So when you are able to reuse code, right, you tend to have less code, and less code usually means less bugs. Why code something twice, right? If you can only code it once, it's pretty much common sense. Like, why not do this? And for people who are on, tight budgets in a startup, or in a new division of a company, trying to fit a budget or exceed expectations in terms of finances, it seems to be the first direction people want to go. And then faster development also. So usually with cross platforms, it would take half the time, right? If you're using potentially a single code base, and you're able to distribute that application, on iOS, on Android, potentially on other operating systems, you can do a lot more and reach a lot more customers faster, right? And time is money, so it ends up being cheaper, right? It's really hard to explain why you choose to do something twice when you have the option to just to do it once for half the time, half the money, and things like that. So these are some of the main arguments for choosing a cross-platform solution. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about showing a diagram versus what cross-platform is versus what a native solution looks like. So this is just my diagram from earlier. We have the operating system, the SDKs on top of it, the cross-platform libraries that kind of have to exist between your code and the given SDK or operating system. And then here's the native diagram where you have the same operating system, the same SDKs that the companies publish, and then you have your app code that kind of sits on top. And right away you can kind of see like, okay, yeah, there's two versions of the app code versus before there was one. I kind of wrote what is normal in terms of or required, I guess, for writing for these different operating systems. For example, with iOS, you use Objective-C or Swift, and with Android, you use Java or Kotlin. Of course, you can also use C and C++, but that's not very common. Cool. So kind of getting into why someone would choose native development, or some arguments for why native development might be a better choice. The first one is less dependencies. So what that diagram showed in the previous slide, it just seemed, the native side seemed smaller, less complex, right? So with less dependencies, you're not relying on another system for the ability to create your application. Having one less dependency, you don't have to rely on what they support, what they don't support. That's one thing. Another thing is you have the ability to incorporate newer technologies faster. For example, you might have more flexibility with a native approach to adopt, say, like app clips or widgets, or there might be a new camera or new camera capabilities that are available on iOS or Android, and you can just adopt these newer technologies faster if you're not relying on a cross-platform dependency and waiting for them to incorporate it into their system, so that way you can use it. Let's see, support for wearables, for example. That's something that you just may not be able to do, or something that you may have to wait for an extension or have to build your own extension for. So that's kind of getting into the next item, is cross-platform extensions. So with React Native and Flutter, there are the ability to create native extensions for those using those platforms. And to me, this kind of gets away from the whole reason of using cross-platform to begin with, right? The whole idea was code reusability and hopefully having like one set of code to then publish on multiple operating systems. But as you get into specific things you want to do, say you want to support Android's Camera X, or say you want to support multitasking windows with iPad. Usually if you want to support something natively and the platform itself doesn't support it yet, hopefully they have a way for you to create some sort of extension. And this kind of now takes you away from having one code base into having 3 or more code bases, right? You have the shared code, but then you have the iOS specific code, the Android specific code. So now you have potentially 3 different code bases, and it kind of gets more complex from there. And Xamarin actually requires you to have this to like a set of native code for every operating system. And then less complex, right? So I think native development is just less complex overall. As we saw in those diagrams, you deal with complexities when you deal with cross-platform solutions. And when you have less issues, or when you're less complex, you have less issues. And that could be compile time issues. I've spent days and days trying to figure out why something from a cross-platform solution, one of those boxes, it would create that code that library that would run on iOS or Android. But then when I try and compile the iOS or Android application, I would get some sort of compiled issue, and I wouldn't say like why, what's wrong. There wasn't much information to go by. It just wouldn't work. So I ran into that a lot. And then also runtime issues. So say everything worked, I was able to create the cross-platform application, get it on the iOS and Android, and all of a sudden something on iOS was crashing and something on Android wasn't, or the other way around. And I would get some error, some exception that didn't really give me much to go off of. Maybe it was a signal 11 or some sort of other unhandled exception, and I didn't really know what to do. Everything would debug fine, everything would run fine locally, but when it runs on a certain device or operating system version or something, it just would crash, and there's no way to figure out why. And then compatibility. So when you have a complex system, you usually have less compatibility. So when you have native app development, you're usually able to be compatible with more versions, operating versions, more devices, be able to be more compatible that way. So native experience is another thing I wanted to talk about. So a lot of cross-platform solutions kind of give you a single experience, right? And this is usually could be appealing to some companies or some stakeholders. For example, Flutter, they kind of give you a single experience by default, where it's like kind of material design, and it looks and feels the same on iOS and Android, similar to when we were using other platforms as well, like Titanium, for example, Accelerator Titanium. It was a single type of unified experience, and a lot of people like this for branding and other things. But I also feel like this kind of goes against the differences between, say, the different mobile operating systems like Android and iOS. I feel like different users of Android expect different things from their applications, and iOS users expect different things from their applications. For example, Android users are really used to having the action bar, right, on top of their views, where they can do certain things and rely on certain things to be able to use their applications without question. And iOS has, for example, a swipe back gesture, for example, that I know a lot of iOS users use and like and rely on. And if that's not supported by that cross-platform solution, then you kind of break that for the user, and the user becomes a little less happy for using the application. Android has a lot of customization options compared to iOS, and those cross-platform solutions may not handle that correctly, may become buggy, may not support them at all, and that's something that native development kind of gives you more ability to create good experiences for your customers and stakeholders. Another argument for native development is that today there's fewer popular operating systems. So 10 plus years ago, there was a lot more operating systems, like I touched on, where cross-platform development seemed to be a lot more appealing. So there's 5 or 6 mobile operating systems, BlackBerry and Facebook and Windows and things like that. So maybe Facebook was a type of Android operating system, but today there's primarily just 2. So that's kind of one argument that I think is important, that if there were 5 or more popular operating systems, I think cross-platform development would have a lot stronger option in my mind. But now that there's just primarily 2, I think there's more benefit with native development there. Employee candidates. So I think this is a really big argument for native development, where I think there's a lot larger pool of people who are highly skilled in iOS and Android compared to any given cross-platform solution. I think there's a smaller pool of people who are highly skilled on any given platform. Just being the sheer amount of cross-platform solutions that are out there, which I showed on a previous slide. And it's just seems to be what I found. It's important consideration when you're building a team or even sustaining a team to have more of a native development system going on, because it's easier to find great people and also to replace people when they decide to move on.
Brad,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, we have a question come in, if you don't mind going back to an earlier topic real quick.
Of course.
This person asked, could you go over the argument on cross-platform extensions for native solutions?
Of course.
I think I missed it. Was it for or against?
Oh, so the cross-platform extensions, I guess, could be an argument for cross-platforms and against native development, but I'm actually using it as an argument for native development. And the reason for that is that I think that having cross-platform extensions, which is basically creating native modules for a specific platform when you're doing cross-platform development, it kind of goes against the whole reason for having a cross-platform solution to begin with. And it creates even more complexity, being that there's now, multiple modules per operating system and multiple code bases, and you're pretty much just, using the native SDKs anyways in those extensions. And the more complex things you want to do in an application, the bigger those extensions become. And so that kind of leads into the complexity issue and just an argument against cross-platform extensions or cross-platform solutions. Does that kind of make sense? Did that answer that question?
So whoever asked that question, I hope that helps. Yeah, I want to kind of add to what Brad said, because I spoke a little bit in the chat about how I was also a cross-platform mobile developer in Titanium back in the day. And yeah, I totally can understand the argument, because there are going to be some situations where you have to build extensions, SDK extensions for cross-platform solutions. An example might be like Bluetooth, right? Especially if it involves like the hardware. I don't know, for example, if there are iOS and Android Bluetooth libraries for React Native. Maybe someone who is working in React Native can speak to that. But if there isn't, you have to build that. So now you're building your app in React Native, and then native Android, for the Bluetooth library, and native iOS as well. So now you actually need more expertise and need to learn more languages to build something that used to be built on only one language.
Yeah. So kind of getting into my last, bullet point here is there's a growing native cross-platform capabilities happening right now. So for example, there's people that are building Swift on Android, and I don't know if anyone is familiar with Kotlin native, but those are some growing capabilities that are happening right now, where say you can use a native programming language, a native code base, and have some code that also is shareable into the other platform. So that's another reason to stay native. Cool. So kind of getting into conclusion a little bit, I wanted to specify that a cross-platform solution might be the best choice. For example, for games, I think that if I was working for a game company, Unity might be a really good choice for a project, being that with native platforms, there's game support, for example, Sprite Kit on iOS, but from what I can tell with Unity and how I've used it in the past, like it's the capabilities in terms of games and having a single code base that publishes well on multiple platforms might be the best way to go. Another example might be if you have a team of web developers, right? If you have a team of web developers that are very experienced with the React framework, and you need a mobile application to complement your product or suite of products, then using React Native and doing the project with React Native might be the best choice, because that's what your team expertise is on, and you'd be able to get that product out, with a higher chance of success if you choose to go with something like that. But I think it's also really important to keep the distance between you and your customer short or small. So I'd like to, if you have dependencies, right, like a cross-platform that you need to deal with, or something else that you're already dealing with Apple and Google as something that sits in between you and your customer, I don't think you want to add more and more into that line between you and your customer or your stakeholder, because potentially they get in your way, right? When you want to do something or do something to help support your customer. So I think it's important to keep that distance small between you and your customer. And then I think that native development increases chance for long-term success. So both in creating a successful application that can meet and adapt to your customers' changing needs, and also, maintaining support for that. For example, there might be a cross-platform solution that might work really well for you, and it might stop getting support, right? And no longer get updates, and you're just kind of stuck with what you have, and for the long term, and you might need to recreate it or recreate the application later on if people stop supporting that platform. I think over the past 10 years, I've seen that cross-platform solutions coming and going. I actually started a game with Cocos 2DX, which was we used Cocos 2D natively with a lot of success as a game engine, and then they came out with Cocos 2DX, which was a cross-platform game engine that you didn't have a lot of the licensing issues with other game engines, and it turned out great, except for it was an open source project that stopped getting support, and then we were kind of stuck and couldn't really do much more with it unless we added the capabilities ourselves. So I think with native development, it kind of increases your chance for long-term success. So that kind of wraps it up. Was there any other questions or anything I can answer for anybody?
So Brad, I did get a question from Erica that was actually to me asking how I felt about developing in Titanium. So I'll share my experience, and Brad, if you want to add to the war stories, you're certainly welcome to. So I actually had a chat, Brad and I, earlier before this event started about so before I became a native iOS developer, I was a cross-platform developer in Titanium. And the way that Titanium worked is that you had to develop and test for both Android and iOS at the same time for the entire development cycle. And the reason why is because it compiles into native code, but as Brad mentioned earlier, there may be like some components in iOS that doesn't exist on Android or vice versa. And so you have to kind of catch those differences and write branching code for that throughout your development process. If you're not diligent in doing that and you think, oh, I'll just write it once and just test it on iOS, for example, and then I'll just port it to Android when I'm done, and then try to run on Android, it blows up because you're not accounting for, those occasional platform differences. So, so that was my experience being a Titanium developer. I was actually very good at it, and I used to even run a meetup on Titanium in the Denver area back in the day, but that was the biggest problem that a lot of people trying to adopt Titanium encountered, was that they were trying to build for one platform and port to the other at the end, and it just didn't work out that way. So that was my experience. I don't know if you had something similar, Brad, when you worked on. And by the way, I was pleasantly surprised to know that someone else actually also worked in Titanium back in the day. I thought like I was the only one.
Yeah, I think the argument for Accelerator Titanium back in the day was a strong one, being that PhoneGap was probably one of the other more popular choices, but had the performance issues that I mentioned. So we decided to, we did a couple proof of concepts with it, and it turned out that it was working really well and early on. So we decided to go forward with it, and the client, definitely was on board also. And like you said, like we did run into issues. Kind of, they wanted the iOS version first, so we kind of coded to that, and then they obviously the requirement also was that an Android version was needed, and we had to go back and change a lot of stuff because we weren't testing on Android from early on. So that was an issue. I remember that the UI was very strict. We couldn't do a lot of things that someone that was developing something natively would be able to do. Like I mentioned, just the swipe to delete on a table. That actually ended up preventing us from releasing the project for the customer. So and so we ran into a lot of little UI things like that. Whereas I often say, like, the devil's in the details with things, and unless there's clear requirements early on regarding how things should work from a detailed level, things like that is missed, and could sabotage a whole project.
And we do have another question from Navati. She says, I don't know anything about game development, but does one face cross-platform challenges with Unity? And is it different from the typical app development challenges, or is it a case of benefits outweighing the risks?
Yeah, so there are some issues with doing things with Unity. Unity's come a long way over the years. Early on, when I was using Unity, there was no like UI solution built in. You kind of had to create your own UI. There was no like built-in buttons or things like that. You kind of had to create your own from scratch. So it was very appealing from a native standpoint, just to drag and drop a button in interface builder, right? But with Unity, everything was kind of in code. There was no like UI based development system, but now there is. So that the Unity people that work on Unity kind of heard from their community and created that solution in the past probably it's probably been a while now, probably 5 years or so. But let's see, if you wanted to kind of create that native feel like I was talking about, if you want, say you're in your game, you wanted some screens that were have that Android or iOS look and feel, you really can't get that, right? So that would be a big something that could you can run into. I have a story about something that we needed to do at the mobile development agency. We wanted to have an application, but a little mini game inside of it. And we decided to, I guess it was decided for us that would be done with Unity. And we somehow had to incorporate this Unity game into our application. And I think anyone who has experience in Unity might be like, nope, that you can't do that. So we were never successful in doing that on iOS. However, with Android, we were able to kind of bake in an Android application into an Android application, and we were able to do it for Android with not in a good way. It was kind of a very hacky way of doing it, and there was crashes on a lot of different devices and operating system, versions of Android. But so that's another thing you could run into, is if you wanted to kind of do mini games and kind of put it into, another, a native application, or, if you have like mini games created with different engines or something like that, like you really just can't do that with Unity. A Unity application needs to be all Unity. Like you can't really do much on top of it. And sometimes it's hard and complex to do things like push notifications or in-app purchases or things like that, like some of the more native, Apple services or Google services, especially as new ones are created. Getting those into your project are oftentimes really difficult. And usually Unity has a marketplace where people are really quick to, create and sell, plugins for different things like this, but cost money, and sometimes they're buggy and there's nothing you can do about it if they have bugs, and or you can create something yourself or try to edit the project. But as you try to create stuff after the Unity code has been compiled into a project, it's not pretty, and oftentimes is very complex and difficult to do, and you get stuck a lot.
Oh, it looks like we have another question from Erica. What is your favorite to work on for your projects if you can choose?
My favorite native or cross-platform.
Yeah, I guess it's not clear. I'm sure, Erica, did you mean favorite native or favorite cross-platform? Or I guess you can answer both.
Yeah, I guess.
Cross or both. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So I've been trying to stay up to date with React Native and Flutter as far as cross-platform goes, because to be honest, I see most job postings with those requirements in mind. And I kind of use that as a gauge. I kind of use job postings as a gauge of like what the marketplace looks like for potential people that can join our team, and what specializations are out there, and things like that. So what is the market looking for and what is available? I see a lot of React Native and Flutter. Flutter's definitely been growing, I feel like. And to be honest, I like using Flutter. And mostly because of the type safety. So that's one reason I don't like React Native, is because with the JavaScript, you don't run into many compile time issues, or arguably no compile time issues. But you get a sense of you get compile time issues with Flutter, and of an issue right away, versus if you use something like JavaScript and it's not compiled and not type safe, then you basically run into a lot more runtime issues. So you get a lot more crashes and something if you make a mistake, where with Flutter you don't do that. And so I think there's also an element of like, in my experience and with the teams that I've been on, people just enjoy using Xcode and Android Studio. Of course, there's always the issues that the different IDEs have, but they get a sense of joy of creating, UI, or the fast compile, or the simple experiences you get as a developer. Especially with Swift UI and Compose, some of those more UI, declarative UI approaches. Like engineers enjoy using those and putting them into projects. And you also get that with Flutter. Flutter also has a declarative UI kind of built in to their Android Studio extension, and just kind of enjoy building applications with it and seeing how fast you can do things with material design also on the different platforms, and how well it works, and how you can hook it up to Firebase easily and have create applications really quickly that do really cool things, and have backends and authentication and uniform UI and things like that. So probably Flutter is right now is my favorite cross-platform solution to use. But it's still really young. and they're still doing lots to it. I think you don't have the ability to create web applications. It's being worked on. I think it's last time I checked, it was an alpha or beta to create like web applications with Flutter, like web apps. But there was like very, very limited capabilities there. And last time I tried, it was not really realistic to create any to then publish on a web application on like a website, where you can do that a lot easier with React Native. You basically just create your shared code and React using the React framework, and then put a HTML page on it, and then you also have a web version.
Looks like there's some love for Flutter in the chat, so that's fantastic.
Yeah. And then as far as like native, as far as like iOS and Android, I have more experience with iOS than I do with Android. Being that when I worked for JibJab for 4 years, or Storybots for 4 years, we primarily did iOS applications. We did very little Android. So that's like 4 years of my career that I spent on iOS. So I tend to be more current, and I like iOS development a little better. It just, I guess, makes me happier using Xcode and creating iOS applications. I'm iPhone. I own iPhones, not Android devices, except for testing with. But I think that Android has a lot of great capabilities, and especially some of the newer stuff they're doing with Kotlin Compose and Kotlin Flow and things like that. I think it's they're getting very similar in my mind. Like the more as long as the operating still remain the most popular ones, they seem to be getting closer and closer to be doing the same things and things like that. So I hope that answers your question.
So I see there's a comment that there will be a Flutter event. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, so sign up for that, people that are interested. And I guess we'll have some Code Mobile members who will be speaking. So that's pretty exciting.
Very cool.
All right, so do we have any other last minute questions? There's been a lot of folks saying, thanks, Brad. Great talk. A lot of appreciation for you sharing your comments and your experience with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, like on my team, we don't have any female engineers right now. We actually have a QA analyst that wants to be an iOS engineer. So kind of helping her, grow in that area. And hopefully one day I'll be able to hire her. In past companies, I have had female engineers and love having, that type of diversity on the team. And so for all of you out there, keep going, and hopefully, we can see more, female presence in engineering and mobile development.
Do I hear that you're hiring, or?
My team is not hiring right now, unfortunately. But I would keep your eyes open on the CCC Intelligent Solutions career page, and it doesn't matter where you are in the country right now. I've been working remote for 2 years, and in those 2 years, my team has pretty much scattered all across the country in different places. And so I think it's for the foreseeable future, we are open to pretty much anywhere, as long as the skill set's there and the mindset's there. And but unfortunately, no, not right now. We're not hiring for mobile, although we probably are hiring for web, C# engineers right now.
Well, thank you again so much, Brad, for speaking today and sharing your knowledge and your thoughts on native versus cross-platform development. And welcome to stay in touch with our community. We'd love to have you back here again anytime. And yeah, thanks to everyone for attending and your questions and comments. So yeah, any last words from anyone before we wrap up? Yeah, more thanks coming in.
Oh, absolutely. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. All right, well, have a great day, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much. We'll see y'all.